The frozen wind carried the scent of blood across Shieldheim as a child's cry pierced the winter night. In the forest clearing, a small figure trembled against a fractured oak, his breath forming desperate clouds in the frigid air. Torchlight flickered between distant trees as warriors approached, their weapons gleaming. Then a solitary silhouette emerged from the shadows, a Shieldmaiden with fire in her eyes and defiance in her stance, prepared to challenge everything she once held sacred for a boy whom fate had abandoned. 24 hours earlier, the world had been quieter for Eirik Kaelsson. The 17-year-old apprentice blacksmith trudged along the frozen fjord's edge, his calloused hands still warm from the forge. Each step sank into fresh snow with a satisfying crunch that momentarily drowned the emptiness inside him. 4 winters had passed since the plague claimed his parents, leaving him with nothing but memories and the protection of a reluctant master. Shieldheim stood nestled between towering mountains and ancient pine forests, a collection of wooden structures with smoke rising from their roofs like prayers to indifferent gods. The village had existed this way for generations, resilient, isolated, and bound by traditions as unyielding as the surrounding ice. For those born here, the world consisted of the clan's boundaries, the distant trading posts, and the occasional raids on rival settlements. Anything beyond that might as well have been Jotunheim, the mythical realm of giants. Eirik paused at the water's edge, where ice had formed crystalline patterns along the shore. He studied his reflection in a patch of clear water. Angular face, eyes the color of storm clouds, and dark hair that fell across his forehead in unruly waves. His father had been a warrior of some renown, his mother a healer whose hands could mend both flesh and spirit.
And what was he? A boy who shaped metal instead of his destiny, who dreamed of belonging while remaining forever apart. "Hammer that straighter, boy!" Gunnar's voice echoed in his memory, the master blacksmith's perpetual dissatisfaction a constant companion. "Your father would have had it perfect on the first strike." The comparison to his father was Gunnar's favorite tool, sharper than any blade Eirik had forged. Yet he endured it, working the bellows until his arms ached and hammering metal until blisters formed and broke upon his palms. The forge had become his sanctuary and his prison, the place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of creation while remaining trapped in another man's shadow. In the distance, the village horn sounded, marking midday. Eirik turned back toward Skjoldheim, his gaze sweeping over the longhouses with their carved dragon heads and the great hall where the council elders gathered. Smoke from cooking fires created a haze above the settlement, giving it an ethereal quality against the stark white landscape. Children darted between buildings, their laughter carrying on the wind, while women tended to winter stores and men prepared weapons for the spring raids that would come after the thaw. As he approached the village, Eirik noticed a commotion near the eastern gate. A hunting party had returned, their spears bloodied from a successful expedition. At their center walked Jorunn Svensson, the eldest of the council, his white hair whipping in the wind like a banner. The old man's face was set in its customary stern expression, blue eyes surveying the village as if constantly assessing its weaknesses. "The omens speak of a harsh winter," Jorunn proclaimed to those who gathered. "The gods test our resolve. We must be vigilant against those who would bring misfortune upon Skjoldheim." The words weren't directed at Eirik, yet he felt their weight nonetheless. Since his parents' deaths, he had existed on the periphery of the clan, useful for his developing skill at the forge, but never truly one of them. Orphans were viewed with a mixture of pity and suspicion in Skjoldheim. Without family bonds to anchor them, their loyalty was considered uncertain, their presence a potential burden. Eirik slipped past the gathering, heading toward the smithy where the day's work awaited. The building stood apart from other structures, its walls blackened by years of smoke. Inside, the familiar scent of hot metal, charcoal, and sweat enveloped him. Gunnar stood at the anvil, his massive frame silhouetted against the forge's glow as he hammered a piece of red-hot iron into submission. "You're late," the master blacksmith growled without looking up. "The Jarl's sword won't reshape itself." Eirik removed his fur cloak and donned his leather apron, the material stiff with ingrained soot and burns from wayward sparks. The ice was thick on the path, he offered, knowing excuses meant nothing to Gunnar. "Ice doesn't stop a true Viking," came the predictable response. "Your father would have." "Been here before dawn," Eirik finished silently, moving to the bellows to bring the forge to proper heat. The day passed in a blur of smoke, sweat, and the rhythmic percussion of hammer against metal. Eirik lost himself in the work, finding peace in the transformation of unyielding iron into something purposeful. By the time the winter sun began its early descent, his arms trembled with exhaustion, but the pile of finished work, nails, hinges, and a repaired axe head, spoke of a productive day. "That will do," Gunnar said, inspecting Eirik's work with grudging approval. "Clean up and be gone. I have business with the council tonight." Outside, darkness was already claiming Skjoldheim. Torches flickered to life along the main paths, casting long shadows across the snow. Eirik's small dwelling sat at the village's edge, a single room with a hearth, sleeping platform, and the few possessions he had inherited. It wasn't much, but it was his alone, a rare privacy in a community where families typically shared longhouses. As he approached his home, Eirik noticed fresh tracks in the snow leading toward the forest edge. Small footprints, unevenly spaced, as if their owner had been running. Curious, he followed them a short distance, where they disappeared among the trees. The forest at night was no place for anyone, especially a child, if that's what the tracks suggested. "Hello?" he called, his voice swallowed by the dense pines. "Is anyone there?" The forest remained silent, save for the occasional creak of branches heavy with snow. Eirik was about to turn back when he heard it, a sound so faint he might have imagined it. A whimper, barely audible, coming from a thicket of snow-laden bushes. Cautiously, he approached, pushing aside the branches. Huddled against the base of a pine was a small figure, arms wrapped around drawn-up knees. A boy, perhaps 6 summers old, with hair as black as a raven's wing, and skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dimness. The child wore only a tattered tunic and a worn cloak, both inadequate against the biting cold. His feet, wrapped in crude cloth bindings, were blue with cold. The boy's head snapped up at Eirik's approach, revealing eyes wide with terror, dark pools that seemed to contain all the fear in the world. His thin fingers clutched a small wooden amulet, carved with symbols Eirik recognized with a jolt of unease. They were the markings of the Eastern clans, traditional enemies of Skjoldheim, whose raids had claimed many lives over the generations. "I won't hurt you," Eirik said softly, crouching to appear less threatening. He extended a hand slowly, palm up, as one might approach a wounded animal. The child pressed himself harder against the tree, trembling violently. Not just from cold, Eirik realized, but from bone-deep fear. In that moment, everything changed. The boy's terror mirrored something Eirik recognized from his own soul, the desperate loneliness of being without protection in a world built on kinship bonds. Without conscious decision, Eirik removed his cloak and gently wrapped it around the child's shoulders. "You'll freeze to death out here," he said, knowing the boy likely couldn't understand his words. "Come with me." When the child made no move to follow, Eirik carefully lifted him, surprised at how little the boy weighed. The small body was rigid at first, then gradually relaxed as warmth from Eirik's chest seeped through the cloak. The amulet remained clutched in the boy's hand, a connection to whatever life he had fled. Eirik's mind raced as he carried his burden toward the village. The child was clearly not from Skjoldheim. His features, the amulet, even the pattern of his tattered clothing marked him as an outsider. And not just any outsider, but one from the clans that Skjoldheim considered enemies. To shelter him would be seen as treason by some, particularly Yoren and the more traditional elders. The penalty for harboring enemies could be severe, banishment at best, execution at worst. Yet looking down at the exhausted child now nestled against his chest, Eirik knew he could not abandon him to the merciless winter night. Something about the boy's desperate situation echoed his own orphan state, despite the vast differences in their circumstances. Reaching his dwelling, Eirik glanced around to ensure no one observed his return. Luck was with him. Most villagers were gathered in the great hall for the evening meal. He slipped inside, securing the door behind them, and gently placed the child near the banked hearth. Working quickly, he built up the fire until flames danced cheerfully, casting warm light throughout the simple room. The boy remained motionless, watching Eirik's every movement with wary eyes. His small body still shook with cold or fear or both. Eirik retrieved a woolen blanket from his sleeping platform and wrapped it around the child, then rummaged through his meager stores for food. "You must be hungry," he said, offering a piece of hard bread and a strip of dried meat. "It's not much, but it will help." Hesitantly, the boy accepted the food, sniffing it before taking a small bite. Once he started eating, hunger overtook caution, and he devoured everything Eirik offered. When Eirik brought a cup of water, the child drank greedily, water spilling down his chin in his desperation. "Slow down," Eirik said gently. "There's more if you need it." As warmth and food worked their magic, the boy's eyelids began to droop. Still clutching his amulet, he fought to stay awake, jerking his head up whenever it started to nod. Eirik recognized the behavior, the fear of vulnerability that comes with sleep when surrounded by potential threats. "You can rest," Eirik said, gesturing to his own sleeping platform. "No one will harm you here." The boy's response was to draw his knees up tighter, creating a smaller target of himself. His dark eyes remained fixed on Eirik, evaluating, calculating, in a way no child should need to. Eirik sat back on his heels, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken in the space of an hour. He had no plan beyond this moment, no idea how to keep the child hidden in a village where everyone knew everyone else's business, where an outsider would be immediately noticed and questioned. Worse, the symbols on the amulet marked the boy as being from the Wolfclaw clan, whose raids had left Skjoldheim mourning its dead more than once. If discovered, the child might be killed outright, or at minimum held hostage for leverage against his people. Neither fate was one Eirik could allow, though he had no clear idea how to prevent it. As if sensing Eirik's thoughts, the boy's hand tightened around his amulet.
The firelight caught the carvings, a stylized wolf with runes etched along its body. Such amulets were said to contain the protection of ancestors, a physical connection to the gods, and the spirits of one's family line. "You need a name," Eirik said, more to break the silence than anything else. "I can't just call you boy while you're here." The child watched him, uncomprehending but alert. Vali, Eirik decided, remembering a tale his mother once told of a god's son who survived against impossible odds. "I'll call you Vali." The boy gave no indication of understanding or approval, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion overcoming fear, but Eirik chose to see it as the first fragile thread of trust forming between them. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the small dwelling. Snow began to fall more heavily, further isolating them from the rest of Skildheim. It was a temporary reprieve. By morning, decisions would need to be made, risks calculated. But for now, in the warm circle of firelight, Eirik allowed himself to believe they were safe. "Sleep if you can," he told Vali, arranging furs on the floor for himself. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As the night deepened around them, Eirik lay awake, listening to the child's breathing gradually slow into the rhythm of sleep. What had he done? What would come of this impulsive act of compassion? The questions circled in his mind like ravens over a battlefield, promising nothing but uncertainty ahead. Yet beneath the anxiety lay a strange sense of purpose he hadn't felt since before his parents died. For the first time in years, his actions mattered beyond the day's work at the forge. Someone depended on him completely. A terrifying responsibility, but also a gift he hadn't known he needed. With that thought, Eirik finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, one hand resting on the knife beside his makeshift bed, ready to protect the small life he had chosen to save, whatever the cost might be. Dawn broke with the muted gray light peculiar to northern winters. Eirik woke with a start, momentarily confused by the presence of another person in his dwelling. The events of the previous night rushed back as he observed the small form still curled on his sleeping platform. Vali was awake, dark eyes tracking Eirik's movements with the vigilance of one accustomed to danger. "Good morning," Eirik said softly, keeping his distance to avoid frightening the boy. "Are you hungry?" The child made no response, but his gaze flickered to the small shelf where Eirik kept his food stores. Moving deliberately, Eirik prepared a simple breakfast: more bread, a bit of cheese he'd been saving, and dried berries. He placed it on a wooden plate near Vali, then retreated to give the boy space to eat. As the child tentatively reached for the food, Eirik noticed raw scrapes on his wrists, as though he had been bound. The sight sent a surge of anger through Eirik. Whatever the conflicts between their peoples, no child deserved such treatment. He wondered what horrors Vali had witnessed, what journey had brought him alone to the forests outside Skjoldheim. Had he escaped captivity? Was he the sole survivor of some attack, or had he been abandoned, deemed too much trouble to feed during the harsh winter months? Outside, the village was coming to life. The sounds of morning activities filtered through the walls, voices calling greetings, animals being tended, the metallic ring of the day's first work at the forge. Soon Gunnar would expect Eirik at the smithy. Absence would raise questions, but leaving Vali alone seemed equally dangerous. "I need to go to work," Eirik explained, gesturing toward the door and pantomiming hammering. "You must stay here, hidden. Do you understand? Stay." Vali's expression remained unreadable, but he drew the blanket tighter around himself, seeming to grasp the need for concealment.
Eirik quickly arranged his dwelling to better hide the boy's presence. He created a small nook behind his storage chest, lined with furs and blankets. "If anyone comes, hide here," he demonstrated, pointing to the space. "I'll return with more food when I can." The look Vali gave him contained equal parts doubt and resignation, the expression of one who had learned not to expect protection to last. It tore at Eirik's heart, but he had no choice. To miss work would draw immediate attention, potentially bringing unwanted scrutiny to his home. "I promise I'll come back," he said, placing a hand over his heart in a gesture he hoped transcended language barriers. With reluctance, Eirik left his dwelling, securing the door as best he could. The morning air bit at his face as he made his way through Shieldheim toward the smithy. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering his tracks from the previous evening, a small mercy. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching, of suspicion lurking behind every friendly nod he received. At the forge, Gunnar was already working, his massive frame silhouetted against the glowing hearth. "You're late again," he growled without looking up. "Forgive me, master," Eirik replied, donning his apron. "I slept poorly." Gunnar grunted, uninterested in excuses. "The Jarl wants spearheads, 20 by week's end. Start on the blanks." The familiar routine of the forge should have been comforting, but Eirik found himself distracted, his thoughts repeatedly returning to the frightened boy hidden in his home. Each time the smithy door opened, his heart raced, anticipating discovery and accusation. By midday, his hands were shaking so badly that he misplaced a hammer strike, nearly crushing his fingers. "What ails you today, boy?" Gunnar demanded, his thick brows drawing together. "You're working like a thrall with fever." "Nothing, master," Eirik mumbled, focusing on the metal before him. Gunnar studied him for a long moment, then spat into the forge. "Take your midday meal. Return when your mind is on your work, not in the clouds." The unexpected reprieve was welcome. Eirik hurried to the communal cooking pit, where he was able to claim a portion of stew and bread. Wrapping the food in a clean cloth, he slipped away from the village center, intending to check on Vali. He was halfway to his dwelling when a voice stopped him cold. "In a hurry, Eirik Kaelsson." He turned to find Astrid Hallsdóttir watching him with sharp green eyes. The Shieldmaiden stood with one hand resting casually on the axe at her belt, her distinctive half-shaved head making her impossible to mistake for anyone else. Despite being only 10 years his senior, Astrid had earned her place among Skjoldheim's most respected warriors. Her presence on raids was considered a blessing from the gods, her skill with shield and axe legendary throughout the region. "Just taking my meal, Astrid," he replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze uncomfortably perceptive. "You've never been one to eat alone before. Usually you sit with the other apprentices." Eirik forced a shrug. "I have work to finish. Gunnar is displeased with my progress today." "When is Gunnar ever pleased?" she asked, a rare smile briefly softening her features. "Still, it's unlike you to earn his true displeasure. Your skill at the forge is one of the few things he praises, after the mead has loosened his tongue." The compliment, unexpected from such a source, would normally have warmed Eirik to his core. Now it only increased his anxiety to be away from his dwelling, away from Vali. "Thank you," he managed. "I should return quickly." Astrid's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "The council meets tonight. There are rumors of strangers in the forests." "Be watchful, Eirik." The warning sent ice through his veins. Strangers? What kind? Scouts, perhaps, or survivors from some conflict we haven't yet heard about. Her hand tightened on her axe handle. Whatever comes, Skjoldheim stands ready. With that, she turned and walked away, her confident stride marking her as a woman accustomed to respect. Eirik watched her go. His appetite vanished, replaced by churning fear. If the council was already aware of strangers, how long before a search revealed Vali's presence? He practically ran the remaining distance to his dwelling, heart pounding. The door was as he had left it, no sign of disturbance. Inside, the fire had died down to embers, and for one terrible moment he thought Vali had fled. Then he spotted movement in the hiding place he had created, 2 dark eyes watching him from the shadows. "It's just me," Eirik said, relief flooding through him. "I've brought food." Vali emerged cautiously, his small face pinched with hunger and wariness. He accepted the cloth-wrapped meal with trembling hands, then retreated a few steps before unwrapping it. The hot stew was a luxury compared to the morning's simple fare, and the boy ate with focused intensity, as if fearing it might be taken away at any moment. While Vali ate, Eirik built up the fire again, his mind racing. The village was already alert to the possibility of outsiders. It would be only a matter of time before a thorough search was organized. He needed a better hiding place for Vali, or better yet, a way to get him safely away from Skjoldheim altogether. But where could a child go in the depth of winter? The nearest settlement friendly to Skjoldheim was a 3-day journey through snow-filled mountain passes. No child could survive such a trek alone. And Eirik couldn't simply disappear without raising immediate alarm. As he stoked the fire, his gaze fell on Vali's wooden amulet, still clutched tightly in the boy's free hand even as he ate. The wolf symbol seemed to stare back at him, a reminder of the gulf between their peoples. "Where is your family?" Eirik asked, knowing the question was futile but unable to stop himself. "Your mother? Father?" Vali paused in his eating, eyes darting to Eirik's face. Something flickered there, recognition of the question's intent, perhaps, or simply a response to Eirik's tone. The boy's free hand made a sweeping gesture, then dropped limply to his side. The message was clear enough. Gone. "I'm sorry," Eirik said quietly. "My parents are gone too." He touched his own chest, then pointed to Vali, trying to communicate their shared loss. Whether the boy understood or not, something in his posture softened slightly. He finished his meal in silence, then, to Eirik's surprise, offered the empty cloth back with a small nod that might have been thanks. The gesture, simple as it was, created a lump in Eirik's throat. This child, who had every reason to fear and distrust, still remembered the basic courtesies. Whatever horrors he had witnessed hadn't yet destroyed his humanity. "I must return to the forge," Eirik said reluctantly. "Stay hidden. I'll come back when the day's work is done." As he turned to leave, small fingers caught at his sleeve. Vali was looking up at him, dark eyes intense. The boy pointed to his own chest, then to the floor, then made a questioning gesture. "Yes," Eirik said, understanding the silent inquiry. "You can stay. I'll keep you safe." It was a promise he had no idea how to keep, but in that moment he meant it with every fiber of his being. Vali seemed to sense his sincerity. The small shoulders relaxed slightly, and he retreated to his hiding place without further protest. Back at the forge, Eirik threw himself into his work with renewed focus, hoping physical labor would quiet his troubled thoughts. The rhythm of hammer on metal became meditative, allowing him to work through the problem before him piece by piece, just as he shaped the iron in his hands. By the time dusk fell, he had completed more spearheads than Gunnar had demanded for the entire day, earning a grudging nod from his master. "Whatever distracted you earlier seems to have passed," Gunnar observed as they cleaned the workspace. "Good. The Jarl doesn't reward excuses, only results." Eirik nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the evening. He needed to return to Vali to ensure the boy had enough food and warmth for the night. Beyond that, he still had no plan, only the growing certainty that keeping Vali hidden in Skoldheim would become increasingly impossible. As he left the smithy, the village was gathering for the evening meal in the great hall. Normally, Eirik would join them, taking his place at the table reserved for craftsmen and their apprentices. Tonight, however, the council meeting Astrid had mentioned would follow the meal, a meeting where strangers in the forest would surely be discussed. His absence would be noted, but attending might provide crucial information about how much the village leaders suspected. After a moment's hesitation, Eirik changed direction, heading for the great hall instead of his dwelling. He would eat quickly, listen to the council's deliberations, then slip away to check on Vali. The hall was already crowded when he arrived, filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter. Fires blazed in the long central hearth, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls where shields and weapons hung as decorations and practical necessities. At the far end sat the high table, where Jorunn Svensson and the other elders presided over the gathering. Eirik found a seat at the craftsman's table, nodding greetings to familiar faces. He kept his head down, focusing on the food before him, while straining to catch snippets of conversation from nearby tables. Most talk centered on mundane matters, the winter stores, preparations for spring planting, gossip about who might pair with whom when the marriage season arrived after the thaw. It wasn't until the meal was nearly finished that Jorunn rose from his seat, his white hair gleaming in the firelight. The hall gradually fell silent as the elder raised his hands for attention. "People of Skoldheim," he began, his voice carrying easily through the large space. "The gods have blessed us with another day of life in these harsh lands. We honor them with our strength and vigilance." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Eirik forced himself to look attentive, while his thoughts remained with the small boy hiding in his dwelling. "Our hunters have found signs of intruders in our forests," Jorunn continued, his blue eyes scanning the assembled villagers. "Tracks that suggest scouts from the eastern clans, perhaps preparing for a raid when they believe us weakened by winter." A tension spread through the hall. The eastern clans, including the Wolfclaw, whose symbol adorned Vali's amulet, were traditional enemies of Skoldheim. Their raids had claimed many lives over the generations, including those of Eirik's father and uncle. "We must be watchful," Jorunn declared. "Any stranger must be reported immediately to the council. Any sign of unusual activity, any unexplained absence or behavior, these could indicate treachery or danger to our people." Eirik felt cold sweat break out along his spine. The elder's words seemed directed specifically at him, though he knew that was impossible. No one could know about Vali yet. Still, he found himself unable to meet Jorunn's gaze as the old man continued. "Tomorrow, we will organize search parties to scour the surrounding forests. If scouts are present, we will find them. If they have already departed, we will follow their trail and ensure they carry no valuable information about our defenses back to their masters." The announcement was met with grim approval from the gathered villagers. Eirik's mind raced. Search parties would mean most able-bodied men away from the village, perhaps an opportunity to move Vali to a safer location. But where? And how to avoid the searches themselves? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Astrid at the high table. The Shieldmaiden leaned down to speak quietly to Jorunn, whose expression darkened as he listened. The elder nodded sharply, then addressed the hall again. Astrid brings word that one of our boundary markers has been disturbed. Tonight we set additional guards on all approaches to Skildheim. No one is to leave the village without permission until the threat is assessed. The pronouncement fell like a stone in Eirik's stomach. Additional guards would make any attempt to move Vali exponentially more dangerous. And if the search parties were thorough, they might even extend to the dwellings within Skildheim itself. As the meeting continued, plans being laid out for the village's defense, Eirik forced himself to remain still, to nod at appropriate moments and keep his expression neutral. Inside, his thoughts churned like the sea during a storm. He had perhaps one night, this night, before discovery became almost inevitable. When the gathering finally began to disperse, Eirik rose with the others, trying to appear unhurried as he made his way toward the exit. He was nearly there when a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. Eirik Kaelsson. He turned to find Jorunn himself standing there, the elder's weathered face unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "Elder Jorunn," Eirik acknowledged, fighting to keep his voice steady. "How may I serve?" The old man studied him for a long moment, blue eyes sharp beneath bushy white brows. "You were quiet tonight. Usually you have questions about the council's decisions." Eirik swallowed hard. "I was thinking of my father. Talk of the eastern clans brought memories." Something softened minutely in Jorunn's gaze. "Your father died honorably defending Skjoldheim. He would expect his son to be equally vigilant against our enemies." "Yes, elder," Eirik managed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Jorunn leaned closer, his voice dropping. "These are dangerous times, boy. Divided loyalties can be as deadly as any blade. Remember where you belong." With that cryptic warning, the elder moved away, leaving Eirik frozen in place, heart hammering against his ribs. Did Jorunn suspect something? Or was it merely a general caution delivered to a young man whose loyalty might be questioned due to his orphaned status? Either way, the message was clear. Skjoldheim demanded absolute fidelity from its members. Harboring a child from an enemy clan, intentionally or not, would be seen as the gravest betrayal. Shaken, Eirik left the great hall, stepping into the cold night air with relief. The village was quieter now, most inhabitants either still at the gathering or already retired to their dwellings. He moved quickly through the shadows, avoiding the newly positioned guards until he reached his small home. Inside, the fire had again burned low. "Vali," he called softly, dread filling him when no immediate response came. A small movement from the hiding place revealed the boy, eyes wide and wary in the dim light. Eirik sagged with relief, quickly rebuilding the fire to ward off the night's chill. "I'm sorry I was gone so long," he said, though he knew Vali couldn't understand. "Things have become complicated." As the flames grew, illuminating the small space, Eirik noticed something different about Vali. The boy had arranged Eirik's few possessions in a neat row beside his hiding place. A comb, a small wooden figure Eirik's father had carved for him, a polished stone his mother had claimed was lucky. Each item had been carefully cleaned, the dust wiped away, and placed with deliberate precision. The sight brought an unexpected lump to Eirik's throat.
It was a child's attempt at payment, perhaps, or simply a way to pass the lonely hours of waiting. Whatever the motivation, it spoke of a soul that sought to contribute, to be more than just a burden. "Thank you," Eirik said, gesturing to the arranged items. "That was kind of you." Vali watched him uncertainly, then slowly extended his closed fist. When he opened his fingers, Eirik saw the wooden amulet resting on the small palm, offered not as a gift, but as something to be examined. It was the first time the boy had willingly relinquished his most treasured possession. Carefully, Eirik accepted the amulet, turning it in the firelight to study the intricate carvings. The wolf design was skillfully rendered, its eyes tiny chips of amber that caught the light. Around its body ran runes in the old style, their meanings obscure to Eirik, who had only rudimentary knowledge of such matters. "It's beautiful," he said honestly, returning it to Vali with a respectful nod. "Your family's protection." The boy clutched the amulet to his chest, then pointed to Eirik and raised his eyebrows in question. Understanding, Eirik removed the iron hammer pendant he wore beneath his tunic, his own family symbol, crafted by his father before his death. "This is mine," he explained, showing it to Vali. "My father made it, for protection, like yours." Vali studied the hammer pendant with solemn intensity, then looked up at Eirik's face. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched the boy's lips, a fleeting expression of connection across the gulf of language and culture. The moment was shattered by a sudden pounding on the door. "Eirik Kaelsson, open in the name of the council!" Vali's face drained of color, his body instantly rigid with terror. Eirik's mind raced, panic threatening to overwhelm rational thought. The search couldn't have begun already. It was too soon, too unexpected. "Hide," he whispered urgently to Vali, gesturing frantically toward the concealed space. "Quickly!" As the boy scrambled into hiding, Eirik moved to the door, taking a deep breath to compose himself before lifting the latch. Outside stood two of Skjoldheim's warriors, their faces grim in the torchlight. Behind them, her expression unreadable, stood Astrid Hallsdóttir. "The council requires your presence," one warrior stated flatly. "Now." "At this hour?" Eirik questioned, fighting to keep his voice steady. What matter couldn't wait until morning? The second warrior's hand moved to his sword hilt. "It is not your place to question the council's summons, blacksmith's apprentice." Eirik's gaze shifted to Astrid, seeking some clue in her expression. The Shieldmaiden's green eyes revealed nothing, her face a mask of professional detachment. "May I at least secure my dwelling?" Eirik asked, thinking desperately of Vali hidden inside. "You won't be gone long," the first warrior replied, his tone making it clear that further delay would not be tolerated. With no choice, Eirik stepped outside, closing the door behind him. As the warriors flanked him, leading him toward the great hall, Astrid fell into step beside him. "What is this about?" he asked her quietly. For a moment, she thought she wouldn't answer. Then, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear, she said, "Someone saw you bringing something, or someone, to your dwelling last night. The council wants answers." Eirik's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you mean." Astrid's sideways glance was sharp enough to cut. "Don't lie to me, Eirik. It insults us both." After a pause, she added, "Whatever you've done, face it with courage. That, at least, your father would expect." The reference to his father, the second time that night, stung like a slap. Before he could formulate a response, they arrived at the great hall, now emptied of its usual crowd. Only the council members remained, seated at the high table with Yoren at their center. Torches cast long shadows across the wooden floor, giving the familiar space an ominous atmosphere. Eirik was brought to stand before the council, the warriors remaining at his sides like living restraints. Yoren's cold blue eyes assessed him, finding him wanting in ways Eirik couldn't begin to enumerate. "Eirik Kaelsson," the elder began, his voice echoing in the near-empty hall. "You have been observed bringing a stranger into Skjeldheim under cover of darkness. Explain yourself." Denial rose automatically to Eirik's lips, but he swallowed it back. Lying would only make his situation worse when the truth inevitably emerged. Yet the full truth would condemn not only himself, but also Vali. "I found a child in the forest," he said finally, deciding that partial honesty was his only viable path. "He was alone, freezing. I couldn't leave him to die." Murmurs ran through the council members. Yoren leaned forward, his rings gleaming in the torchlight. "A child? From where? What clan?" Eirik hesitated. "He doesn't speak our language. I don't know his origins." "You lie," Yoren said flatly. "No child appears from nowhere in midwinter. He belongs to someone, to some clan. And you, Eirik Kaelsson, have brought him into the heart of Skjeldheim without the council's knowledge or permission." One of the other elders, a woman with iron-gray braids, spoke up. "If the child is, as you say, alone, abandoned, then why hide him? Why not bring him to the council's attention immediately?" It was the question Eirik had been dreading, the one with no acceptable answer. I feared he would be mistreated, that his origins might matter more than his innocence." "Innocence?" Joran's voice was sharp as a blade. "What innocence exists between enemy clans? The eastern wolves have raided our settlements, killed our people, your own father among them, for generations. And you dare speak of innocence?" The elder's words confirmed Eirik's worst fears. They already knew or strongly suspected Vali's origins. Someone must have seen the amulet or recognized something else about the boy that marked him as being from the Wolfclaw clan. "He's a child," Eirik insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Barely 6 summers old. Whatever conflicts exist between our peoples, he bears no responsibility for them." "Enough!" Yoren slammed his fist on the table. "Your dwelling will be searched. If this child is indeed from the eastern clans, he will be held as surety against future raids. Perhaps his presence here will give his people pause before they next consider attacking Skjeldheim." Horror washed through Eirik at the implication. They would use Vali as a hostage, a bargaining chip in the endless cycle of violence between the clans. A child used as a weapon, the very thought revolted him. "And you, Eirik Kaelsson," Yoren continued, his voice like winter ice, "will face the consequences of bringing an enemy into our midst. The council will determine your punishment after the truth of this matter is fully revealed." The warriors beside Eirik tightened their grips on his arms, preparing to lead him away, presumably to some holding place while his dwelling was searched and Vali discovered. In that moment, with options rapidly disappearing, Eirik made a desperate gamble. "The boy is under my protection," he declared, loud enough for his voice to carry to every corner of the hall. "I claim responsibility for him under the ancient law of sanctuary." A stunned silence followed his words. The law of sanctuary was rarely invoked, a tradition dating back to the earliest days of their people, when a warrior could claim personal responsibility for an enemy who had shown exceptional courage or honor.
Once invoked, it placed the protected person under the invoker's guardianship until the next full moon, during which time no harm could come to them without violating sacred law. Jorun's face darkened with anger. You dare invoke sanctuary for an enemy child? You are no warrior, Eirik Kaelsson, merely a blacksmith's apprentice. You have no standing to make such a claim. The law makes no distinction of rank, a new voice interjected. Only that the claimant be of age and sound mind. All heads turned to find Astrid stepping forward, her expression resolute. The Shieldmaiden moved to stand beside Eirik, her presence lending weight to his desperate claim. The boy has committed no crime against Skjoldheim, she continued, addressing the council directly. To hold him hostage would bring dishonor upon us all. Jorun's cold gaze shifted to Astrid, narrowing dangerously. You support this foolishness, Shieldmaiden? You, who have sworn to protect Skjoldheim against all enemies? Astrid met his stare without flinching. I have sworn to protect Skjoldheim's honor as well as its people. There is no honor in threatening a child, regardless of his origins. A murmur ran through the council members, some nodding in reluctant agreement with Astrid's words. The Shieldmaiden's reputation gave her influence even among the elders, and her support of Eirik's claim could not be easily dismissed. Jorun's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. This matter is not so simply resolved. The child may be innocent, but his presence here cannot be without significance. If he was sent as a spy— He's a frightened boy who was running for his life, Eirik interrupted, emboldened by Astrid's support. Not a spy. He was bound at some point. I saw the marks on his wrists. Whatever his story, he deserves compassion, not suspicion. The female elder with iron-gray braids leaned forward. Let us see this child for ourselves. If he is as you describe, perhaps there is wisdom in your claim of sanctuary. If not— She left the consequence unspoken. Jorun considered for a long moment, then nodded sharply. Bring the boy here, now. We will judge this matter with our own eyes. The warriors released Eirik, clearly expecting him to lead them back to his dwelling where Vali hid. He hesitated, looking to Astrid for guidance. The Shieldmaiden gave him a barely perceptible nod, encouragement to comply, at least for now. I'll bring him, Eirik said, his voice steadier than he felt. But I ask that you remember he is frightened and doesn't understand our language. Treat him with gentleness. You are in no position to make demands, Eirik Kaelsson, Jorun replied coldly. Bring the boy. The council will decide what happens next. Escorted by the warriors and accompanied by Astrid, Eirik left the great hall, his mind racing. Had he made things better or worse by invoking sanctuary? The law would protect Vali temporarily, but what would happen when the protection period ended? And why had Astrid, known for her loyalty to Skjoldheim and its traditions, chosen to support him? As they approached his dwelling, Eirik's anxiety peaked. What if Vali had fled during his absence? What if the boy's fear led him to resist, confirming the council's worst suspicions? The child trusts you, Astrid said quietly, seeming to read his thoughts. Use that trust to keep him calm. His behavior before the council may determine both your fates. Eirik nodded, grateful for the advice, even as he wondered at her motives. At his dwelling, he paused before opening the door. Let me enter first, he told the warriors. He'll be frightened by strangers. After a moment's hesitation, they agreed, though they positioned themselves to block any possible escape. Eirik entered alone, his heart pounding. "Vali," he called softly, "it's me, Eirik." For a terrifying moment there was no response. Then, slowly, the small form emerged from the hiding place, dark eyes wide with fear and question. Eirik crouched to the boy's level, speaking gently. "We need to go somewhere. People want to meet you." He pointed to Vali, then to himself, then to the door, trying to communicate through gesture what words could not convey. Vali's gaze darted to the door, then back to Eirik's face. The boy's expression spoke volumes. He sensed the danger, understood on some level that leaving the relative safety of the dwelling meant facing unknown threats. "I'll protect you," Eirik promised, placing a hand over his heart. "You won't be alone." After a moment's hesitation, Vali nodded slightly, his small shoulders squaring with a courage that belied his years. He clutched his amulet tightly in one hand, then reached out with the other to take Eirik's offered palm. The contact, the first voluntary touch Vali had initiated, sent a surge of protectiveness through Eirik. This child trusted him, despite every reason not to. He would not betray that trust, whatever the cost. Together, they stepped outside to face whatever fate awaited them. The walk back to the great hall seemed both endless and too brief. Vali clung to Eirik's hand, his small body pressed close to Eirik's side, as if seeking to disappear within the older boy's shadow. The warriors flanked them, their expressions grim, while Astrid walked slightly ahead, her back straight and her stride purposeful. Villagers had begun to emerge from their dwellings, drawn by the unusual activity. They watched in silence as the strange procession passed, their faces showing curiosity, confusion, and, in some cases, outright hostility when they caught sight of Vali. The boy's distinctive features and the visible edge of his amulet marked him clearly as an outsider, and to those familiar with the Eastern clans, specifically as one of the Wolf Claw. Eirik felt each stare like a physical blow, his protective instincts flaring with every whispered comment or pointed finger. He placed his free hand on Vali's shoulder, drawing the child closer still. "Ignore them," he murmured, though he knew Vali couldn't understand the words. "Just keep walking." At the great hall, the doors stood open, torchlight spilling out into the night. Inside, the council waited, now joined by several more of Skjoldheim's prominent figures, warriors, the village healer, and even Gunnar, his massive arms crossed over his chest as he scowled at his apprentice. Eirik felt Vali falter at the threshold, the boy's steps becoming leaden as he took in the assembled crowd. Kneeling quickly, Eirik looked into the child's frightened eyes. "Be brave," he said softly. "I'm with you." Whether Vali understood the words or merely the intent behind them, he drew a shaky breath and nodded, his small hand tightening around Eirik's. Together they entered the hall, advancing until they stood before the council table. Yoren's cold gaze settled on Vali, taking in every detail of the child's appearance. His eyes narrowed when they reached the wooden amulet clutched in the boy's hand. "A wolf-claw child," the elder confirmed, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "The very clan that raided our northern settlement last spring, killing 3 of our people and stealing our livestock." Vali pressed himself harder against Eirik's side, clearly understanding that he was being discussed, even if the words themselves meant nothing to him. "He's just a child," Eirik repeated, his voice steadier than he expected. "Whatever his clan has done, he bears no guilt for it." The female elder with iron-gray braids leaned forward, her gaze more curious than hostile as she studied Vali. "How came you to find him, Eirik Kaelsson? Tell us the full truth now." Eirik swallowed hard, then recounted the events of the previous night. how he had noticed tracks in the snow, followed them to find Vali huddled in the forest, and made the decision to bring him to safety. He was alone? No adults nearby? Another elder questioned. None that I saw, Eirik confirmed. He was half frozen, terrified. I couldn't leave him to die. Joran's expression remained skeptical. And you expect us to believe that a child of the Wolfclaw clan, barely 6 summers old, somehow traveled alone through winter forests to end up precisely outside Skjoldheim? The coincidence strains belief, boy. Before Eirik could respond, Astrid stepped forward. May I examine the child more closely, Elder Joran? Perhaps there are clues to his journey that Eirik missed. After a moment's consideration, Joran nodded his permission. Astrid approached slowly, her movements deliberately non-threatening as she crouched before Vali. The boy shrank back initially, but Eirik's reassuring squeeze of his hand seemed to give him courage. I won't hurt you, little wolf, Astrid said gently, her voice softer than Eirik had ever heard it. With careful movements, she examined Vali's exposed skin, his face, neck, and hands. When she reached for his wrists, the boy flinched, but allowed her to push back his sleeves, revealing the raw marks Eirik had noticed earlier. Binding marks, Astrid announced, looking up at the council. Recent ones. And there's this. She gently turned Vali's head to reveal a half-healed cut along his hairline, previously hidden by his dark hair. A weapon strike, glancing but deliberate. Someone tried to harm this child, and recently. A murmur ran through the assembled villagers. Even Joran's expression showed a flicker of something beyond suspicion, perhaps concern, or at least doubt in his initial assessment. Who would bind and strike a child of their own clan? The female elder asked, her brow furrowed. Perhaps he is not of their clan, another council member suggested. A captive from some other raid? Astrid shook her head. His features are Wolfclaw. The amulet is a family token, not something given to a captive. She pointed to the wooden charm. May I? Vali clutched the amulet tighter, his dark eyes wide with fear. Eirik knelt beside him. She won't take it, he promised, miming examining the amulet and then returning it. She just wants to look. After a moment's hesitation, Vali reluctantly extended his hand, the amulet resting on his palm, but his fingers still curled protectively around its edges. Astrid studied it without touching, her green eyes narrowing in concentration. This bears the mark of the Wolfclaw chieftain's line, she said finally, looking up at the council. The amber eyes in the wolf carving, only the ruling family uses such embellishments. This child is no ordinary member of their clan. The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the hall. Joran's expression darkened further, his suspicion clearly rekindled. The chieftain's kin? Here, in Skjoldheim? He turned to one of the warriors. Double the guards on all approaches to the village. If this child is valuable to them, they may come seeking him. Or they may be the ones he fled from, Astrid countered, rising to her feet. These injuries were not accidental, nor were they sustained in some childish mishap. Someone meant this boy harm. The female elder spoke again, her voice thoughtful. There were rumors after the last trading season. The Wolfclaw chieftain died suddenly, leaving 2 brothers to contest leadership. Perhaps this child is caught in that struggle? All the more reason to use him to our advantage, Joran argued. If he holds value to either faction, he becomes a powerful bargaining tool for Skjoldheim. Eirik felt sick at the calculating tone, the way they discussed Vali as if he were a commodity rather than a frightened child standing right before them. He looked down at the boy, who was watching the proceedings with the wary attention of one accustomed to being discussed but never consulted. "I invoked sanctuary," Eirik reminded them, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "By our oldest laws, he cannot be used as a hostage or bargaining tool while under my protection." Joran's cold gaze fixed on him. "And when the sanctuary period ends with the full moon, what then, Eirik Kaelsson? Would you have us simply return a valuable asset to our enemies?" "I would have us act with honor," Eirik replied, surprising himself with his boldness. "To use a child as a weapon shames us all." Gunnar stepped forward then, his massive presence drawing all eyes. "The boy speaks sense," the blacksmith said gruffly, shocking Eirik with his support. "We are Vikings, not cowards who make war on children. If the Wolfclaw want this boy, let them come openly to negotiate. Until then, he has claimed sanctuary through my apprentice, and I stand by that claim." The unexpected alliance, Astrid, then Gunnar, left Joran momentarily speechless. The elder's gaze swept the hall, measuring the mood of the assembled villagers. What he saw must have given him pause, for his next words were more measured. "The law of sanctuary stands until the full moon," he conceded reluctantly. "But the child will not stay in your dwelling alone, Eirik Kaelsson. He will be housed where he can be properly supervised." "I'll take him," Astrid said before anyone else could speak. "My home has space, and none would dare suggest I cannot keep proper watch over one small boy." Her offer silenced further debate. Even Joran could find no reasonable objection to the village's most respected Shieldmaiden taking responsibility for Vali's supervision. After a moment's consideration, he nodded sharply. "So be it. The child remains under sanctuary until the full moon, housed with Astrid Hallsdóttir and under the responsibility of Eirik Kaelsson." His cold gaze fixed on Eirik once more. "But mark me well, boy. Any attempt to remove him from Skjoldheim, any suspicious behavior, and the sanctuary is void. The council will then decide his fate and yours." The threat was clear, but Eirik found he cared less about his own fate than Vali's. He nodded his understanding, then knelt once more beside the child who had upended his entire existence in the space of a day. "You're going to stay with her," he explained, pointing to Astrid. "She's a friend. She'll protect you." Vali's dark eyes darted between Eirik and Astrid, uncertainty and fear evident in his expression. He shook his head slightly, his hand tightening around Eirik's. "I'll visit you," Eirik promised, miming walking and then pointing to where Astrid stood. "Every day you won't be alone." The boy still looked unconvinced, but some of the panic faded from his eyes. He gave a tiny nod, though he made no move to release Eirik's hand. Astrid approached slowly, crouching to Vali's level. "Little wolf," she said gently, "you are safe with me. No harm will come to you in my home." Though Vali couldn't understand her words, something in her tone or expression seemed to reassure him. After a moment's hesitation, he allowed Astrid to take his free hand, though he maintained his grip on Eirik with the other. "The council is adjourned," Jorun announced, clearly displeased with the outcome, but unwilling to challenge the combined support of Astrid and Gunnar. "We will revisit this matter before the full moon." As the gathering began to disperse, Eirik found himself the target of curious and sometimes hostile glances from his fellow villagers. He had challenged the council, invoked ancient law, and aligned himself with an enemy clan's child, all in the space of a single night. Whatever came next, his life in Shieldheim would never be the same. Astrid waited until the hall had mostly emptied before speaking again. "We should go," she told Eirik. "The boy needs rest, and this night has already been too long." Eirik nodded, then gently disentangled his hand from Vali's. "Go with Astrid now," he said, gesturing between them. "I'll come tomorrow." The look Vali gave him was one Eirik knew would haunt his dreams, a mixture of trust, fear, and resigned acceptance that spoke of a child who had learned too early that safety was always temporary. With a final glance back at Eirik, Vali allowed Astrid to lead him from the hall, his small shoulders set in a posture of determination that seemed far too adult for his years. As they disappeared into the night, Eirik felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Gunnar watching him with an unreadable expression. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, boy," the blacksmith said gruffly. "I couldn't leave him to die," Eirik replied simply. Gunnar studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Your father would have done the same." Coming from the master blacksmith, it was the highest praise Eirik had ever received. "Get some rest. The forge awaits at dawn, and you'll need your wits about you in the days to come." With that, Gunnar departed, leaving Eirik alone in the nearly empty hall. As he made his way back to his dwelling, now eerily quiet without Vali's presence, Eirik wondered what he had set in motion with his impulsive act of compassion. The sanctuary would protect Vali until the full moon, but what then? And why did he care so deeply about the fate of a child he had known for barely a day? Perhaps because in Vali's frightened eyes, Eirik saw a reflection of his own loneliness, his own experience of being adrift in a world built on family bonds he no longer possessed. Whatever the reason, one thing was certain. He had committed himself to this path, and he would see it through, for Vali's sake, and perhaps for his own as well. Dawn broke cold and clear over Skaldheim, the rising sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. Eirik had slept poorly, his dreams filled with pursuing warriors and a small boy running endlessly through dark forests. He rose early, determined to check on Vali before beginning his day at the forge. Astrid's dwelling stood apart from the others, befitting her status as both Shieldmaiden and council advisor. As Eirik approached, he rehearsed what he would say, how he would explain his visit without appearing overly concerned or suspicious. Before he could knock, however, the door swung open to reveal Astrid herself, fully dressed and armed, as if preparing for patrol. "I wondered when you would appear," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes assessing. "I wanted to see how Vali fared," Eirik replied honestly. Astrid studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to allow him entry. "He's eaten and seems well enough, though he speaks no more this morning than he did last night." Inside, the dwelling was surprisingly comfortable, simple but well appointed, with weapons displayed alongside domestic items in a way that spoke of Astrid's dual nature as warrior and woman. Vali sat near the hearth, wrapped in a fur blanket too large for his small frame. When he saw Eirik, his dark eyes widened, and a visible tension left his shoulders. "Good morning," Eirik said, crouching before the boy with a smile. "Did you sleep well?" Vali didn't respond verbally, but he nodded slightly, his gaze darting between Eirik and Astrid as if trying to understand their relationship. "He slept fitfully," Astrid remarked, moving to gather her shield from its place on the wall. "Cried out twice in the night, though he calmed quickly enough. Guilt twisted in Eirik's stomach at the thought of Vali facing nightmares alone in a strange place. I should have stayed with him. The council would not have permitted it, Astrid replied matter-of-factly. Besides, he is safe here. None in Skjoldheim would dare breach my home. Her confidence was justified. As a Shieldmaiden who had proven herself in multiple battles, Astrid commanded respect even from those who might otherwise challenge the decision to shelter Vali. I must join the search parties, she continued, adjusting her belt. Joren insists we scour the forests for signs of other Wolfclaw presence. And if you find some? Eirik asked, dreading the answer. Astrid's green eyes met his directly. Then we will know more than we do now. She paused, then added, The boy will remain here while I'm gone. You may stay with him until midday, then return to the forge. Gunnar expects you. The arrangement was more generous than Eirik had dared hope for. Thank you, he said sincerely, for everything you've done. Something flickered in Astrid's expression, a momentary softening that was gone almost before Eirik could register it. I do what honor demands, she replied simply. No more, no less. With that she departed, leaving Eirik alone with Vali in the unexpected quiet of her home. The boy watched him, expectantly, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Well, Eirik said, settling beside him near the hearth, it seems we have the morning together. Vali continued to study him, his small face serious in a way no child should be. After a moment, he reached into his tunic and withdrew his wooden amulet, holding it out for Eirik to see more clearly than had been possible in the great hall. Taking the invitation, Eirik leaned closer to examine the intricate carving. In the daylight, he could see details he had missed before. Small runes etched along the wolf's body, the careful way the amber eyes had been set into the wood, the smooth polish that spoke of frequent handling. It's beautiful, he said honestly. Your family must be very important. At the word family, something changed in Vali's expression, a flicker of pain quickly suppressed. The boy pointed to the amulet, then to himself, then made a sweeping gesture before drawing his finger across his throat in a universal symbol. The message was clear enough, confirming what Eirik had already suspected. Vali's family was dead, or at least the ones who had given him the amulet. The realization deepened the mystery of how the child had ended up alone in the forest outside Skjoldheim. I'm sorry, Eirik said softly, placing his hand over his heart to convey sympathy. My family is gone too. He reached for his own pendant, the iron hammer his father had crafted. Holding it beside Vali's amulet, he created a visual parallel between their situations. Two orphans with nothing but tokens to remember their families by. Vali studied the hammer pendant with solemn interest, then looked up at Eirik's face with an expression that needed no translation. Recognition of their shared loss, a connection that transcended language barriers. The moment was broken by a sudden commotion outside, voices raised in alarm, the pounding of running feet on packed snow. Eirik rose quickly, moving to the window to see what had caused the disturbance. A group of warriors was gathering near the village center, their expressions grim. Among them stood Joren, his white hair whipping in the winter wind as he issued commands.
Something had happened. Something significant enough to disrupt the morning's usual routine. Eirik turned to Vali, who had shrunk back against the wall, fear evident in his posture. Stay here, Eirik said firmly, pointing to the floor. I need to see what's happening. The boy nodded, drawing the fur blanket tighter around himself as if for protection.
Eirik hesitated, reluctant to leave him alone, but needing to understand what was occurring outside. Finally, he decided a quick investigation was necessary. "I'll be right back," he promised, miming a brief departure and swift return. Outside, the air was sharp with tension. Eirik approached the gathering cautiously, positioning himself at its edge, where he could hear without drawing attention to himself. Fragments of conversation reached him, painting a disturbing picture. Found him at the eastern boundary. Throat cut, weapon still in the wound. Wolf-claw blade, no mistake. A cold dread settled in Eirik's stomach. Someone had been killed, apparently by a weapon identifiable as belonging to the Wolf-claw clan. The timing couldn't be worse, coming directly after Vali's discovery and the invocation of sanctuary. Gunnar appeared at Eirik's side, his expression grave. "One of our hunters," the blacksmith said quietly, "Torsten, found dead this morning near the eastern ridge." "Wolf-claw?" Eirik asked, though he already knew the answer. Gunnar nodded grimly. "A distinctive blade left in the wound. Jorun is calling it confirmation that they're scouting our defenses." The implication hung heavy in the cold air. If the Wolf-claw were indeed responsible for Torsten's death, Vali's presence in Skjoldheim would be viewed with even greater suspicion. The sanctuary might hold legally, but the atmosphere in the village would turn dangerously hostile. "Where is the boy now?" Gunnar asked, his voice low enough that only Eirik could hear. "At Astrid's dwelling. I was with him when the commotion started." The master blacksmith's bushy brows drew together. "Return to him. Stay inside. Jorun's temper will cool eventually, but for now it's best if neither of you is visible." The advice was sound, but Eirik hesitated. "What about the forge, our work?" "Can wait a day," Gunnar interrupted. "Go, boy. I'll find you when it's safe to emerge." The gruff kindness was so unexpected that Eirik could only nod his thanks before turning back toward Astrid's dwelling. As he hurried through the village, he noted the changing expressions of those he passed, the suspicious glances, the whispered comments. News of Torsten's death was spreading quickly, and with it renewed hostility toward anything connected to the Wolf-claw clan. By the time Eirik reached Astrid's home, his heart was pounding with anxiety. He slipped inside, relieved to find Vali exactly where he had left him, though the boy's expression suggested he sensed the mounting tension. "Everything is fine," Eirik lied, forcing a reassuring smile. "But we should stay inside today." Vali's dark eyes studied him with that unnerving adult perception, clearly not believing the false reassurance, but accepting that this was all the explanation he would receive. The day passed slowly, Eirik doing his best to distract both Vali and himself from the uncertainty that hung over them. He showed the boy how to play knucklebones, taught him a few words in their language, and even attempted to learn some of Vali's speech in return. By midday, they had established a rudimentary communication system, mostly gestures supplemented by a handful of shared words. It was through this improvised language that Eirik finally began to piece together fragments of Vali's story. The boy had been traveling with men of his clan, his uncles, Eirik gathered from the gestures indicating family relation. Something had gone wrong. There had been fighting, shouting. Vali had been bound, as the marks on his wrists attested, but had somehow escaped during the night. He had run blindly through the forest until exhaustion and cold overtook him, which was when Eirik had found him. The account was fragmented and limited by their communication barriers, but it aligned with the female elders' speculation about internal conflict within the Wolfclaw leadership. If Vali was indeed of the chieftain's line, as his amulet suggested, he might be a pawn in that power struggle, perhaps even its target. But how did Torsten's death fit into this narrative? Had the Wolfclaw warriors been pursuing Vali when they encountered the hunter, or was there some other explanation entirely? Eirik's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. He turned, expecting Astrid, but instead found himself face to face with Yoran and two armed warriors. The elder's cold gaze swept the room, taking in Eirik and Vali sitting together near the hearth. "Circumstances have changed, Eirik Kaelsson," he announced without preamble. "The council requires the boy's presence again." Eirik rose slowly, positioning himself between Yoran and Vali. "Has Astrid returned?" he asked, playing for time. "As the boy's guardian?" "Astrid leads the tracking party following the killer's trail," Yoran interrupted. "In her absence, the council's authority prevails." Fear coiled in Eirik's stomach. Without Astrid's protection, the balance of power had shifted dramatically against them. "The law of sanctuary still stands," he insisted, "until the full moon." "The law of sanctuary does not protect enemies who shed Skjoldheim blood." Yoran's voice rose sharply. "Torsten is dead, his throat cut by a wolf-claw blade. The coincidence of this boy's arrival and a warrior's death stretches belief beyond breaking." "He's a child," Eirik protested, "barely 6 summers old. He couldn't have killed a grown man."
"Perhaps not by his own hand," Yoran conceded. "But he could have been sent to distract us while others infiltrated our territory. A child to play on our compassion while killers moved among us." The accusation was so twisted in its logic that Eirik struggled to formulate a response. Before he could speak, he felt a small hand slip into his. Vali had risen to stand beside him, dark eyes wide, but chin raised in a posture of defiance that belied his years. The sight of the boy's courage steadied Eirik. "Vali had nothing to do with Torsten's death," he stated firmly. "He was bound and fleeing when I found him. If Wolfclaw warriors are nearby, they are more likely his pursuers than his protectors." Yoran's expression remained skeptical, but something in Eirik's certainty gave him pause. "That is for the council to determine," he said finally. "The boy will come with us now. You may accompany him as his claimed protector." It was a concession, albeit a small one. Eirik looked down at Vali, whose grip on his hand had tightened at Yoran's words. Though the boy couldn't understand the exact exchange, he clearly grasped that they were being taken somewhere against Eirik's wishes. "We'll go together," Eirik told him, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "I won't leave you." The promise seemed to steady Vali, who nodded slightly, his small face set in a determination that twisted Eirik's heart. No child should need such courage, such stoicism in the face of adult conflicts they couldn't possibly understand. As they were escorted through Skjoldheim toward the Great Hall, Eirik was acutely aware of the changed atmosphere in the village. Where before there had been curiosity mixed with suspicion, now there was open hostility. News of Torsten's death had spread quickly, and with it a hardening of attitudes toward the Wolfclaw child in their midst. The great hall was more crowded than the previous night, with what seemed like half the village gathered to witness the proceedings. Yoran led Eirik and Vali to the center of the space, where they stood exposed to the scrutiny and judgment of the assembled crowd. People of Skjoldheim, the elder began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. This morning our brother Torsten was found dead, his blood staining the snow of our territory. The weapon that took his life was a wolf-claw blade, left as if in mockery of our grief. A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Eirik felt Vali press closer to his side, the boy's hand cold and trembling within his own. Last night, Jorunn continued, we granted sanctuary to this child of the Wolf-Claw clan, persuaded by arguments of innocence and compassion. Today, we must reconsider that decision in light of Torsten's murder. The female elder with iron-gray braids spoke up. The law of sanctuary is sacred, Jorunn. We cannot simply set it aside because circumstances have become difficult. The law was never meant to protect those who bring death to our doorstep, Jorunn countered. This child's presence and Torsten's murder cannot be mere coincidence. Nor can they be definitively linked, another elder argued. The boy has been in Skjoldheim since Eirik found him. He could not have killed Torsten himself. But those who seek him might have, Jorunn insisted. If he is indeed of the chieftain's line, as Astrid suggested, his disappearance would not go unnoticed or unpursued. The debate continued, with the council divided on how to proceed. Some argued for maintaining the sanctuary until Astrid returned with findings from the tracking party. Others supported Jorunn's view that changed circumstances justified reconsidering their earlier decision. Throughout the discussion, Vali remained silent at Eirik's side, his dark eyes moving from speaker to speaker as if trying to decipher the debate that would determine his fate. His face remained composed, but Eirik could feel the trembling of the small hand within his own. Finally, when the arguments had circled back upon themselves multiple times, Eirik stepped forward. "May I speak?" he requested, his voice steadier than he had expected. Jorunn's cold gaze fixed on him. "You have already said your piece, Eirik Kaelsson." "I have new information," Eirik insisted. "Information that may help the council understand Vali's situation better." After a moment's hesitation, the female elder nodded. "Let him speak, Jorunn. We seek truth, not merely confirmation of our fears." Reluctantly, Jorunn gestured for Eirik to continue. Taking a deep breath, Eirik recounted what he had learned from Vali that day, the fragmented story of traveling with his uncles, conflict within the group, Vali being bound and escaping. "He wasn't sent here as some kind of distraction or spy," Eirik concluded. "He was fleeing from his own people. If Wolf-Claw warriors are indeed in our territory, they are more likely hunting Vali than supporting him." His words caused a stir among the council members. The female elder leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "This aligns with the rumors of leadership conflict within the Wolf-Claw clan," she observed. "If the boy is of the chieftain's line, he may be seen as a threat by one faction." "Or as a valuable asset by another," Jorunn countered. "Either way, his presence draws danger to Skjoldheim." Before the debate could reignite, the hall doors swung open with a bang. All heads turned to see Astrid striding in, her armor spattered with blood and her expression grim. Behind her came two warriors, dragging between them a bound man, whose Wolf-Claw origins were evident in his clothing and the tattoos visible on his exposed skin.
A shocked silence fell over the assembly. Astrid approached the council table, shoving the prisoner to his knees before them. "We found him 2 miles east of where Torsten fell," she reported, her voice hard. He was wounded, not by us, but earlier. The blood trail suggests he was one of at least 3 warriors moving through our territory. Jorun rose from his seat, his cold gaze fixed on the captive. Did he kill Torsten? He denies it, Astrid replied. Claims he and his companions were pursuing a fugitive when they encountered the hunter. Says one of his own group killed Torsten when he refused to provide information. At these words, Vali made a small sound, the first vocalization Eirik had heard from him since their initial meeting. The boy was staring at the prisoner with a mixture of recognition and fear, his body rigid against Eirik's side. The prisoner's head snapped up at the sound, his eyes widening when they landed on Vali. He spat out a stream of words in the wolf-claw tongue, his expression contorted with what might have been rage or desperation. Vali shrank back, his free hand clutching at his amulet as if for protection. Whatever the man had said clearly frightened him deeply. "Silence," Astrid commanded, cuffing the prisoner sharply. She turned to Eirik. "Does the boy know this man?" Eirik nodded, interpreting Vali's reaction. "I think he's one of those Vali fled from." The prisoner continued to stare at Vali, speaking rapidly in their shared language. Though Eirik couldn't understand the words, the threatening tone was unmistakable. "Enough," Jorun ordered. To Astrid he said, "Take the prisoner to the holding pit. We will question him properly once the council has deliberated." As the warriors dragged the still protesting prisoner away, Jorun turned his attention back to Vali. The elder's expression had changed subtly. There was still suspicion there, but also a new consideration as he observed the boy's obvious fear of the wolf-claw warrior. "It seems your account may have merit, Eirik Kaelsson," he acknowledged reluctantly. "The boy appears to be fleeing his own people rather than working with them." Relief washed through Eirik at this concession, but it was short-lived. "However," Jorun continued, "this does not change the fact that his presence has brought death to Skjoldheim. Torsten is dead because these wolf-claw warriors pursued the boy into our territory." "That's not Vali's fault," Eirik protested. "He didn't ask to be hunted." "Intent matters less than consequence," Jorun replied coldly. "The sanctuary will hold until we have questioned the prisoner thoroughly. But know this. If we confirm that Torsten died because of this boy's presence here, the council may yet rule that the sanctuary is void." It wasn't the victory Eirik had hoped for, but it was a reprieve, however temporary. He felt Vali's small body trembling against his, the boy's composure finally cracking under the strain of seeing his pursuer and being the center of such intense scrutiny. "May we return to Astrid's dwelling now?" Eirik requested, wanting to remove Vali from the hostile atmosphere of the hall. After a moment's consideration, Jorun nodded. "The boy remains in Astrid's custody. You may stay with him until she returns from questioning the prisoner." As they left the great hall, Eirik could feel the weight of dozens of stares following them, some curious, others openly hostile. Vali walked close beside him, his earlier courage now replaced by a bone-deep weariness that showed in every line of his small body. Back at Astrid's dwelling, Vali collapsed onto the sleeping platform, emotional and physical exhaustion finally overcoming his determination to remain strong. Within minutes, he had fallen into a deep sleep, his small hand still clutching his amulet even in unconsciousness. Eirik sat beside the sleeping child, watching the rise and fall of his chest and contemplating the tangled web they found themselves in. The appearance of the wolf-claw prisoner changed everything, confirming parts of Vali's story while simultaneously heightening the danger to them both. If the prisoner revealed that Vali was indeed of the chieftain's line, as his amulet suggested, the council might see his value as a political hostage outweighing the protection of sanctuary. And if the Wolfclaw warriors had indeed killed Torsten while pursuing Vali, Jorun would use that fact to argue that the boy's presence endangered Skjoldheim. Either way, the fragile protection they had established was crumbling. The full moon was still 10 days away, an eternity given how quickly circumstances were changing. Eirik was deep in these troubled thoughts when the door opened to admit Astrid. The Shieldmaiden looked weary, her usual confident posture slightly diminished as she removed her weapons and set them aside. "How is he?" she asked, nodding toward the sleeping Vali. "Exhausted," Eirik replied. "Seeing that warrior frightened him badly." Astrid nodded, settling on a bench across from him. "As well it should. The prisoner is Hakon Wolfclaw, brother to their late chieftain. And if his claims are true, the boy sleeping there is his nephew, son of the dead chieftain and rightful heir to leadership of their clan." The confirmation of what they had suspected sent a chill through Eirik. That's why they're hunting him, he realized. With Vali dead, Hakon's claim to leadership would be unchallenged. "So it would seem," Astrid agreed grimly. "Hakon admits pursuing the boy, but denies ordering Torsten's death. Claims it was the work of a deal overzealous without his approval. Do you believe him?" Astrid's green eyes were unreadable.
"It hardly matters what I believe. Torsten is dead, and someone must answer for it." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by Vali's soft breathing as he slept on, unaware of how his fate was being discussed. "What will happen now?" Eirik finally asked. Astrid sighed, running a hand through her half-shaved hair. "The council deliberates. Jorun pushes for voiding the sanctuary, using Torsten's death as justification. Others resist, arguing that ancient law cannot be set aside for convenience." "And you? What do you argue?" Her gaze met his directly. "I remind them that we are Vikings, not cowards who war on children. That our honor is measured not by how we treat our friends, but by how we treat the vulnerable in our power." The answer surprised Eirik. He had always seen Astrid as a warrior first, her dedication to Skjoldheim's protection leaving little room for such philosophical considerations. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, the question that had been nagging at him since she first supported his claim of sanctuary. "What will happen now?" he asked. Astrid was silent, running a hand through her half-shaved hair. "The council deliberates. Jorun pushes for voiding the sanctuary, using Torsten's death as justification. Others resist, arguing that ancient law cannot be set aside for convenience." "And you? What do you argue?" Her gaze met his directly. "I remind them that we are Vikings, not cowards who war on children. That our honor is measured not by how we treat our friends, but by how we treat the vulnerable in our power." The answer surprised Eirik. He had always seen Astrid as a warrior first, her dedication to Skjoldheim's protection leaving little room for such philosophical considerations. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, the question that had been nagging at him since she first supported his claim of sanctuary. Astrid was silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting to the sleeping child. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Eirik had ever heard it. "I was 7 when raiders came to my first home, far to the south of here. They killed my parents, burned our settlement. I survived only because a warrior from another clan, an enemy of my people, chose mercy over vengeance when he found me hiding." The revelation stunned Eirik. Astrid never spoke of her past before coming to Shieldheim. Like many in the village, he had assumed she was born to their clan. That warrior brought me to his own people, claimed me as his ward, despite the risk to himself, she continued. He taught me that true strength lies not in how many enemies you kill, but in how many lives you choose to spare when killing would be easier. She looked back at Eirik, her green eyes intense. I became a Shieldmaiden to protect those who cannot protect themselves, not just my clan, but any who deserve defense. Your Vali deserves that protection, whatever his blood or origins. He's not my Vali, Eirik protested automatically, though the denial rang hollow even to his own ears. Astrid's lips curved in a rare smile. Isn't he? You claimed him before the council, invoked sanctuary, risked your place in Shieldheim for his safety. If that doesn't make him yours, what would? Before Eirik could formulate a response, Vali stirred on the sleeping platform, his dark eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then recognition dawned as he took in Eirik sitting beside him. You're safe, Eirik assured him, reaching out to smooth the boy's tousled black hair. Rest more if you need to. Vali shook his head, sitting up and rubbing sleep from his eyes with small fists. His gaze moved to Astrid, wariness returning as he remembered the events in the great hall. The warrior who frightened you is imprisoned, Astrid told him, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. He cannot harm you here. Whether from her tone or simply the absence of immediate threat, Vali seemed to relax slightly. He looked at Eirik questioningly, clearly seeking reassurance about what would happen next. We wait, Eirik told him, miming patience with his hands. The council decides. It was a simplification of their precarious situation, but it was all he could communicate given their limited shared vocabulary. Vali nodded, his small face solemn as he absorbed this information. The three of them settled into an uneasy vigil as afternoon deepened toward evening, each lost in their own thoughts as they waited for the council's decision. Outside, Shieldheim continued its daily routines, the life of the village flowing around the drama unfolding in Astrid's dwelling like a river around a stone. As darkness began to fall, a knock at the door broke their contemplative silence. Astrid rose to answer it, hand automatically moving to the knife at her belt. Outside stood the female elder with iron-gray braids, her weathered face grave in the fading light. The council has reached its decision, she announced without preamble. You are all summoned to hear it pronounced. Eirik felt his heart sink at her tone, which suggested the outcome was not what they had hoped for. Beside him, Vali must have sensed the tension, for he pressed closer, seeking reassurance. We will come, Astrid replied, her voice revealing nothing of what she might be feeling. As they prepared to leave, Eirik knelt before Vali, looking directly into the boy's dark eyes. Whatever happens, he said slowly, placing a hand over his heart, I will protect you, I promise. Though Vali couldn't understand the words, the intent behind them seemed to reach him. He nodded solemnly, then reached up to touch Eirik's cheek in a gesture so unexpectedly tender that Eirik felt his throat tighten with emotion. Together, the three of them walked through the torch-lit village toward the great hall, where Shieldheim's council waited to pronounce judgment on a child's fate, and perhaps on Eirik's as well. The great hall was hushed when they entered, the assembled villagers parting silently to allow them passage to the center of the space. The council sat in their usual places at the high table, their faces grave in the flickering torchlight.
Joran occupied the central seat, his white hair gleaming like snow against the dark wooden wall behind him. To one side stood the wolf-claw prisoner, Hakon, still bound, but now cleaned of blood and dirt. His expression darkened when he saw Vali, but the warriors flanking him ensured he made no move toward the boy. Eirik felt Vali's hand tighten around his own as they came to stand before the council.
The child's composure was remarkable given the circumstances, his small face set in lines of determination that seemed far too adult for his years. Joran rose from his seat, his cold blue eyes sweeping over the assembly before coming to rest on Vali. "People of Skjoldheim," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "We gather to resolve a matter that touches on our most ancient laws and our most recent grief." The elder gestured toward Hakon. "This man has confirmed what we suspected. The child among us is Vali Wolfclaw, son of their late chieftain and heir to their clan's leadership. He was being brought to a place of safety when he escaped his uncle's custody and fled into our territory." Murmurs rippled through the crowd at this confirmation. Eirik kept his focus on Joran, trying to read in the elder's expression what decision had been reached. "The prisoner also admits that one of his companions killed our brother Torsten," Joran continued, "though he denies ordering the act. Regardless, blood has been shed on Skjoldheim soil because of this child's presence here." Eirik felt his heart sink at the emphasis Joran placed on this connection. It was clear which way the elder had argued during the council's deliberations. "Our laws of sanctuary are sacred," Joran acknowledged, "dating back to our ancestors' earliest days. Yet those same ancestors understood that no law is absolute, that circumstances may arise where greater considerations must prevail." The direction of his argument was clear now, and Eirik found himself unconsciously drawing Vali closer to his side, as if physical proximity could somehow shield the boy from what was coming. "After much debate," Joran announced, "the council has decided." Wait! The interruption came from an unexpected source, Gunnar, who stepped forward from among the gathered villagers. The master blacksmith's massive presence commanded attention, his deep voice cutting through the tension in the hall. "Before you pronounce judgment," Gunnar continued, addressing Joran directly, "there is something the council should know." Joran's expression darkened at the interruption, but he gestured for Gunnar to proceed. The blacksmith turned slightly, fixing his gaze on Hakon. "This morning, while searching the forest where Torsten was found, I discovered something the tracking party overlooked." From his belt, Gunnar produced a small object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a knife, distinctive in its craftsmanship, with a bone handle carved in the shape of a wolf's head. "This was buried in the snow near Torsten's body," Gunnar explained. "Not the weapon that killed him, but one dropped in haste, perhaps." He held the knife up for all to see, then turned to Hakon. "Is this yours, Wolfclaw?" The prisoner's expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition quickly suppressed. "Many such knives exist among my people," he replied, evasively in accented Norse. "Perhaps," Gunnar agreed, "but this one bears a mark on its pommel, a symbol I recognized from my trading days with your clan." He turned the knife to reveal a small sigil etched into the bone. "This is the personal mark of Hakon Wolfclaw, master knife fighter and brother to the chieftain, is it not?" A tense silence fell over the hall as all eyes turned to Hakon, whose face had hardened into a mask of cold defiance. "What of it?" he demanded. "I was there when the hunter died. I never claimed otherwise." "But you claimed your companion killed Torsten without your approval," Astrid interjected, stepping forward to stand beside Gunnar. "Yet this knife suggests you were close enough to strike the killing blow yourself." Haakon's eyes narrowed. "You have no proof of who wielded the blade that took his life." "Perhaps not," Gunnar conceded. "But we have proof that you lied about your involvement, and that raises questions about what else you have lied about." The blacksmith turned to address the council directly. "Before you decide the boy's fate based on this man's testimony, consider that he has already shown himself to be false in at least one account. What other lies might he have told to serve his purpose?" Yoren's expression was thunderous, but the female elder with iron-gray braids leaned forward, her gaze sharp as she studied Haakon. "Why pursue your nephew with such determination?" she demanded. "What threat does a child pose to a grown warrior?" Haakon remained silent, his jaw clenched in stubborn refusal to answer. "I believe I can answer that," Astrid said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Among the Wolfclaw clan, leadership passes through the male line. With the chieftain dead, his son, young as he is, becomes the rightful leader. But a child cannot rule alone. He requires a regent until he comes of age." "The chieftain's brother would traditionally serve as regent," the female elder noted, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Unless the chieftain named another in his place," Astrid continued, "perhaps someone he trusted more with his son's well-being." All eyes turned to Haakon, whose expression had grown increasingly dark as Astrid spoke. The prisoner's silence was confirmation enough of the truth in her words. "You pursued the boy not to protect him," Eirik realized aloud, "but to eliminate him. With Vali dead, your claim to leadership would be unchallenged." Haakon spat on the ground. "The brat is weak like his father before him. The Wolfclaw needs strength to survive, not a child's empty claim to power." The admission, wrung from him by pride rather than conscience, sent a ripple of shock through the assembly. Even Joren seemed taken aback by the naked ambition revealed in Haakon's words. "You would kill your own brother's son?" the female elder asked, horror evident in her tone. "A child of your blood?" "I would do what is necessary for my clan's survival," Haakon replied coldly, "as any true leader would." Beside Eirik, Vali had gone very still, his dark eyes fixed on his uncle. Though he couldn't understand the exact words being spoken, the boy seemed to grasp the essence of what was being revealed, that the man before them had intended his death, had possibly killed his father before him. Joren rose from his seat, his expression grave as he surveyed the hall. For a long moment he was silent, the weight of decision heavy in the air around him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both authority and a new note of certainty. "The council has heard enough," he declared. "Haakon Wolfclaw stands revealed as a kinslayer in intent, if not yet in deed. His testimony regarding the boy Vali cannot be trusted." The elder's cold gaze shifted to Eirik and Vali. "The law of sanctuary was invoked in good faith and will be honored until the full moon, as tradition demands. The boy will remain under Astrid Hallsdóttir's protection, with Eirik Kaelsson as his guardian." Relief washed through Eirik at these words, though he knew they represented only a temporary reprieve. The full moon was still days away, and the question of what would happen afterward remained unanswered. "As for the prisoner," Joren continued,
turning his attention back to Håkon. He will be held accountable for Torsten's death, whether by his hand directly or by his command. The penalty for taking a Skjoldheim life is clear under our laws. Håkon's expression didn't change, but a new tension appeared in his shoulders, the recognition of a man facing his mortality. The execution will take place at dawn, Joran pronounced. Let Torsten's spirit be appeased by justice, and let all remember the price of shedding Skjoldheim blood.
With that, the assembly was dismissed, the villagers filing out of the hall in subdued conversation. As Håkon was led away to await his fate, he turned once to look at Vali, his expression a mixture of hatred and something almost like respect. "You have your father's luck, little wolf," he said in their shared language. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Though Eirik couldn't understand the words, their threatening tone was clear enough. He drew Vali closer protectively as the prisoner was taken from the hall. When most of the crowd had dispersed, Joran approached them, his manner less hostile than before, but still reserved. "The council's decision stands," he told Eirik, "but know this, when the sanctuary period ends, we must still decide what becomes of the boy. His presence here remains a complication Skjoldheim did not seek and may not be able to afford." Before Eirik could respond, the elder continued. "There will be a gathering of clans at the spring thaw. Representatives from all the northern settlements, including the Wolfclaw, will attend to discuss boundaries and trading rights. Perhaps then a more permanent solution can be found." With that cryptic statement, Joran departed, leaving Eirik, Astrid, and Vali alone in the rapidly emptying hall. "What did he mean by a permanent solution?" Eirik asked Astrid quietly. The Shieldmaiden's expression was guarded. It could mean many things. Returning Vali to his clan under negotiated terms, arranging fostering with a neutral settlement, or using him as a bargaining chip, Eirik finished grimly, leverage against the Wolfclaw. "That is Joran's preference," Astrid acknowledged, "but he is only one voice on the council. Much can change between now and the spring gathering." Vali tugged at Eirik's hand, his dark eyes questioning. The boy had endured yet another ordeal without understanding most of what was said around him, his future discussed and decided by strangers in a language he didn't speak. "We're going home now," Eirik told him, miming sleep and pointing toward Astrid's dwelling. "You're safe for tonight." The simple reassurance seemed to satisfy Vali, who nodded wearily. As they left the great hall, the boy walked between them, one small hand in Eirik's, the other clutching his amulet. Caught between past and present, between the family that had failed him and the strangers who had chosen to protect him. Under the cold stars of a winter night, they made their way through Skjoldheim, three figures united by circumstance and choice in a way none of them could have anticipated just days before. The future remained uncertain, but for tonight at least they had won a reprieve from immediate danger. As Vali finally drifted to sleep that night, exhausted by the day's events, Eirik sat beside Astrid near her hearth, both of them watching the dancing flames in contemplative silence. "What happens after the full moon?" Eirik finally asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him since the council's ruling. Astrid's green eyes reflected the firelight as she considered her response. "That depends on many things. On whether the Wolfclaw send representatives to retrieve Vali. On what evidence emerges about the chieftain's death and Håkon's role in it. On how the council's mood shifts in the coming days. And on what we do," Eirik added quietly. The Shieldmaiden studied him for a long moment.
What would you do, Eirik Kaelsson? How far would you go to protect a child who was a stranger to you mere days ago? It was a question Eirik had been asking himself since the moment he found Vali trembling in the snow. The answer came to him now with surprising clarity. Whatever is necessary, he replied simply. He has no one else.
Astrid nodded, as if his response confirmed something she had already suspected. Then we have days to prepare, to convince the council that there is a better path than using a child as a political tool. And if we fail? Her expression hardened with determination. Vikings do not accept failure easily, Eirik, nor do I. With those words, a pact was formed between them, an unspoken agreement to stand together for Vali's protection, whatever challenges the coming days might bring. As the fire burned low and night deepened around Skjoldheim, Eirik found himself thinking of his father, wondering if the man would approve of the path he had chosen, the stand he was taking for a child of their traditional enemies. Somehow he believed his father would understand. For wasn't this, too, a form of courage? Not the battlefield valor that song celebrated, but the quieter bravery of defending the vulnerable, when doing so brought only risk and no reward. With that thought providing some measure of peace, Eirik finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that dawn would bring new challenges, beginning with Hakon's execution, and whatever consequences might flow from that grim event. The morning of Hakon's execution dawned clear and brutally cold, the sky a pale, merciless blue above Skjoldheim. Frost patterns decorated every surface, transforming the village into a glittering, otherworldly landscape that belied the grim purpose bringing people together in the central square. Eirik had debated whether to bring Vali to witness his uncle's death. On one hand, the sight would surely be traumatic for a child. On the other, keeping him away might leave questions that could fester into fear or confusion. In the end, the decision was made for him when Jorunn sent word that the boy's presence was required, a symbolic witnessing that would be reported back to the Wolfclaw clan as proof of justice served.
"I'll stay with him," Eirik promised Vali as they prepared to leave Astrid's dwelling. "You don't need to watch, just be present." Though the boy couldn't understand the specific words, he seemed to grasp their intent, nodding solemnly as he clutched his amulet in one small hand. There was a new steadiness in Vali's demeanor this morning, as if having faced his uncle's hatred directly had somehow freed him from some of his fear. The village square was already crowded when they arrived, with nearly every resident of Skjoldheim in attendance. Executions were rare events, reserved for the most serious crimes, murder, treason, and oath-breaking chief among them. The atmosphere was solemn rather than bloodthirsty, a community gathered to witness justice rather than to celebrate vengeance. At the center of the square stood a simple wooden block, dark with the stains of previous use. Beside it waited Skjoldheim's executioner, a massive man named Thorvald, whose primary role in the village was as a shipbuilder, but who also served this grimmer purpose when needed. His axe gleamed in the early morning light, its edge honed to razor sharpness. Astrid guided Eirik and Vali to a position near the front of the crowd, but slightly apart, creating a small pocket of space around them. The Shieldmaiden's presence deterred the curious and hostile alike, allowing Vali some measure of protection from scrutiny. A hush fell over the gathering as Jorunn emerged from the great hall, followed by the other council members. The elder wore formal attire, a cloak trimmed with wolf fur, silver arm rings, and a ceremonial knife at his belt. His white hair and beard had been carefully combed, lending him an air of solemn authority as he took his place on the raised platform overlooking the execution block. "People of Skjoldheim," Jorunn began, his voice carrying clearly in the cold morning air.
We gather to witness justice for our fallen brother Torsten, whose blood was spilled on our territory by an enemy hand." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Eirik placed a protective hand on Vali's shoulder, feeling the boy tense beneath his touch. "Håkon Wolfclaw has been judged guilty by the council," Jorunn continued, "not only for the death of Torsten, but for the attempted murder of his own kin, a crime heinous even among enemies." At these words, many in the crowd turned to look at Vali, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something approaching sympathy. The revelation of Håkon's intentions toward his nephew had shifted public opinion somewhat, though wariness of the boy's origins remained. "Let his death serve as warning to all who would shed Skjoldheim blood," Jorunn concluded, "and let it be remembered among the Wolfclaw clan that justice was done according to ancient law and tradition." With that, he gestured toward the holding pit where prisoners were kept. 2 warriors emerged, half dragging Håkon between them. The Wolfclaw warrior's hands were bound before him, but he walked with his head high, refusing to be cowed even in his final moments. As Håkon was brought before the block, his gaze swept the crowd until it found Vali. Something passed between uncle and nephew, a recognition, perhaps, or a final acknowledgment of the blood tie that bound them despite Håkon's betrayal. To Eirik's surprise, Vali stepped forward slightly, his small face composed as he met his uncle's stare directly. There was no fear in the boy's expression now, only a solemn awareness that belied his years. Håkon's lips curved in what might have been a smile or a sneer. He spoke a few words in their shared language, too quietly for most to hear, but clearly audible to Vali, whose expression remained unchanged. Then the moment passed. Håkon was forced to his knees before the block, his neck positioned for the executioner's axe. Given the opportunity for final words, he remained silent, his defiance expressed in the rigid set of his shoulders rather than in speech. Thorvald looked to Jorunn, who gave a single nod. The axe rose, catching the morning light along its edge, then fell in a swift, clean arc. Eirik turned Vali's face away at the last moment, shielding the boy from the sight, if not the sound, of his uncle's death. There was a collective exhalation from the crowd, not celebration, but the release of tension that comes with witnessed justice. "It is done," Jorunn announced after a moment of silence. "May Torsten's spirit find peace, and may the gods judge Håkon Wolfclaw according to his deeds." With that, the formal part of the proceedings ended. The body would be prepared according to tradition, not with the honor accorded to a Skjoldheim warrior, but with the basic respect due any human remains. It would be returned to the Wolfclaw clan at the spring gathering, along with Håkon's weapons and personal effects. As the crowd began to disperse, Eirik felt Vali trembling slightly beneath his hand. Looking down, he was surprised to find not tears, but a fierce intensity in the boy's dark eyes, as if some internal decision had been reached or confirmed. "Are you all right?" Eirik asked softly, crouching to Vali's level. The boy nodded once, decisively, then reached for his amulet. For a moment, Eirik thought he might cast it away, renouncing his connection to the clan whose leadership had sought his death. Instead, Vali tucked it carefully inside his tunic, close to his heart, but out of sight. The gesture seemed significant somehow, not a rejection of his heritage, but perhaps a new relationship with it, a choice to carry his identity privately, rather than displaying it openly, in a place where it marked him as other. "Come," Astrid said quietly, "there's no reason to remain here." They made their way back through the village, aware of the glances that followed them, but finding fewer openly hostile faces than before. Hakon's execution had changed something in Skjoldheim's perception of Vali, not erasing suspicion entirely, but tempering it with a new understanding of the boy's vulnerability. At Astrid's dwelling, they found Gunnar waiting, his massive frame seeming too large for the modest space. The blacksmith nodded a greeting, his expression uncharacteristically gentle as his gaze fell on Vali. "The boy shouldn't have had to see that," he said gruffly. "He didn't watch the end," Eirik assured his master. "I made sure of it." Gunnar grunted approval, then turned to Astrid. "The council has called a private meeting. Something about messages to be sent to the Wolfclaw clan regarding the boy and Hakon's execution." Astrid's expression sharpened with interest. "When?" "Now. They sent me to fetch you." The Shieldmaiden glanced at Eirik and Vali, clearly reluctant to leave them alone after the morning's events. "Go," Eirik urged her. "We'll be fine here. It's important to know what the council plans." After a moment's hesitation, Astrid nodded. "I won't be long," she promised. To Gunnar she added, "Stay with them until I return?" The blacksmith nodded his agreement, settling his bulk onto a bench as Astrid departed. Once she was gone, a slightly awkward silence fell, broken only by the soft crackling of the hearth fire. Vali had retreated to his sleeping place, curled into himself, in a posture that spoke of emotional exhaustion rather than physical tiredness. Eirik moved to sit beside him, offering silent companionship while respecting the boy's evident need for quiet processing of the morning's events. "He's strong," Gunnar observed after a while, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. To face his kinsman's execution with such composure, there's Viking blood in him sure enough. "Too much has been asked of him already," Eirik replied, watching Vali's profile as the boy stared into the middle distance. "No child should have to endure what he has." Gunnar's bushy brows drew together in thought. "What will you do when the sanctuary period ends, boy? Have you considered that?" It was a question Eirik had been avoiding, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of keeping Vali safe day by day. Now, forced to confront it directly, he found himself without a clear answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "Much depends on what the council decides, on whether the Wolfclaw send representatives to claim him." "And if they do? If those who sought his death have taken control of his clan?" Eirik's hand clenched involuntarily. "Then I won't let them take him back to his death." The vehemence in his voice surprised even himself. Gunnar studied him with newfound interest, as if seeing his apprentice truly for the first time. "You've grown attached to the boy," the blacksmith observed. "It wasn't a question." "He has no one else," Eirik replied simply. Gunnar nodded slowly, his gaze moving between Eirik and Vali. "Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming, Eirik Kaelsson. He valued courage in all its forms, not just the battlefield glory that young men dream of, but the quieter strength it takes to stand for what's right when doing so brings only trouble." The words, so similar to Eirik's own thoughts the night before, struck him deeply. Approval from Gunnar was rare enough. To hear him speak of Eirik's father in such terms was unprecedented. "You knew my father well?" Eirik asked, hungry for any connection to the man he had lost too young. "Well enough," Gunnar confirmed. "We raided together in our youth, stood shield to shield in more battles than I care to remember. He saved my life twice, once with his sword, once with his wisdom in counseling retreat when pride would have had me fight to my death." The words, so similar to Eirik's own thoughts the night before, struck him deeply. Approval from Gunnar was rare enough. To hear him speak of Eirik's father in such terms was unprecedented. "You knew my father well?" Eirik asked, hungry for any connection to the man he had lost too young. "Well enough," Gunnar confirmed. "We raided together in our youth, stood shield to shield in more battles than I care to remember. He saved my life twice, once with his sword, once with his wisdom in counseling retreat when pride would have had me fight to my death."
The blacksmith's gaze grew distant with memory. "He was a good man, your father, fierce in battle but gentle at home. He would have understood what you're doing for this child." The validation eased something in Eirik's chest, a tension he hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to release. "Thank you," he said simply. Gunnar nodded, then changed the subject with characteristic abruptness. "The boy needs occupation. Sitting idle with his thoughts after witnessing his uncle's execution will do him no good." It was a practical observation, typical of the blacksmith's straightforward approach to life. Eirik considered what activities might distract Vali from the morning's grim events. "He helped organize my things when I left him alone in my dwelling," Eirik recalled. "Perhaps he would enjoy a simple task, something to do with his hands." Gunnar reached into his belt pouch and withdrew a small piece of wood and a simple carving knife. "Here," he said, offering them to Eirik. "I was working on this during the council meetings. Not much, but it might keep his hands busy." The unexpected thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Eirik deeply. He accepted the items with a nod of thanks, then moved to offer them to Vali. "Would you like to try carving?" he asked, demonstrating a simple cutting motion with the knife against the wood. Vali's attention sharpened, his dark eyes focusing on the offered items with clear interest. He reached out cautiously, accepting first the wood, then the knife, handling the latter with surprising confidence for one so young. "Careful," Eirik cautioned, showing how to hold the blade safely. "Like this." Vali nodded, adjusting his grip with the quick adaptability of childhood. Soon he was absorbed in the task, carefully shaving thin curls of wood as he explored the possibilities of the material in his hands. Watching him work, Eirik was struck by the normalcy of the moment. A child engaged in a simple craft, his small face intent with concentration. It was a glimpse of what Vali might have been without the burden of his birth, without the political complications that had made him a target before he was old enough to understand why. "He has talent," Gunnar observed quietly, watching as Vali's small hands moved with increasing confidence. "An eye for the shape within the wood." "His father might have taught him," Eirik suggested, "or perhaps it simply comes naturally to him." They fell into a companionable silence, both watching as Vali worked, gradually losing himself in the creative process. By the time Astrid returned, the boy had carved a recognizable shape from the wood, a small, crude wolf that nonetheless captured something of the animal's essential nature in its stance and proportions. Astrid paused in the doorway, taking in the peaceful domestic scene with evident surprise. Her expression was troubled, however, suggesting the council meeting had not brought good news. "What happened?" Eirik asked, as she removed her cloak and weapons. The Shieldmaiden sighed, settling onto a bench across from them. "The council has decided to send word to the Wolfclaw clan immediately, rather than waiting for the spring gathering. A messenger leaves tomorrow with news of Hakon's execution and Vali's presence here." Eirik felt a cold knot form in his stomach. So soon? Why? Jorunn argues that prolonging the situation only increases the risk to Skjoldheim. If the Wolfclaw believe we are holding the boy hostage, they might gather forces for a rescue attempt or retaliation for Hakon's death. "But the sanctuary period?"
"Remains in effect," Astrid assured him. "The message simply informs them of the situation and invites representatives to come discuss Vali's future once the winter storms abate enough for travel." Gunnar's expression darkened. "That could be as soon as 3 weeks from now, if the weather turns mild, barely after the full moon." "Precisely," Astrid confirmed grimly. "Jorun wants the matter resolved quickly, before spring raids begin and alliances shift." Eirik glanced at Vali, who continued carving, oblivious to the adult conversation that would shape his fate. "Did the council discuss what terms they would offer the wolf claw?" Astrid hesitated, her green eyes troubled. "Jorun's preference is clear. He sees Vali as valuable leverage. The child's safe return in exchange for concessions on hunting grounds and a formal peace agreement." "Using him as a bargaining chip," Eirik said bitterly. "Exactly as we feared." "Not all the council agrees," Astrid countered. The female elder, Thyra, argued strongly for ensuring Vali's safety above political advantage. She proposed offering him sanctuary until adulthood if returning him would place him in danger. It was a more hopeful alternative than Eirik had expected, but still fraught with uncertainty. "And how would we determine that? Whether returning him is safe or not?" "That remains unclear," Astrid admitted. "Much will depend on who comes from the wolf claw in response to our message, and what evidence they provide of their intentions toward Vali." Gunnar rose from his seat, his expression thoughtful. "The boy's carving may be more significant than we realized," he said, nodding toward Vali's work. "If he can communicate through such means, perhaps he can tell us more about what awaits him among his own people." It was an insightful suggestion, typical of the blacksmith's practical mind. Eirik moved to sit beside Vali, gently drawing the boy's attention from his carving. "Vali," he said carefully, pointing to the wooden wolf the child had created. "Your clan, Wolfclaw. Wolfclaw." He mimed a wolf's paw with his hand. Vali nodded, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. He pointed to his hidden amulet, then to the carving, making the connection clear. Encouraged, Eirik continued, pointing to Vali, then making a questioning gesture while pointing in the direction they understood the Wolfclaw territories to lie. "Do you want to return? To go back?" Fear flashed across the boy's face, quickly followed by a vigorous shake of his head. He drew his finger across his throat, the same gesture he had used earlier when discussing his family, then pointed in the eastern direction. "Death," Eirik translated grimly. "He believes returning means death." Astrid crouched beside them, her expression gentle as she addressed Vali directly. "Who?" she asked, miming looking around for someone. "Who would hurt you there?" Vali considered for a moment, clearly working to bridge the communication gap. Then he held up 3 fingers, pointed to his amulet, and made a gesture like a knife stabbing. 3 members of his clan, Gunnar interpreted, 3 who would kill him. Vali nodded emphatically, relieved to be understood. He pointed to where Hakon had stood during the execution, then held up 1 finger. Hakon was one of them, Eirik realized, but there are 2 more. The boy confirmed this with another nod, his expression solemn. He then pointed to his amulet again, made a crown-like gesture above his head, and pointed to himself. "Because he is the heir," Astrid said softly, "the rightful leader of the clan." Vali's dark eyes met hers directly, wisdom beyond his years evident in his gaze. He understood his situation with painful clarity, that his birthright had made him a target, that those who sought power saw him only as an obstacle to be removed. The revelation cast their dilemma in an even sharper light. If Vali was returned to his clan, he would likely face the same danger that had driven him to flee in the first place. Yet keeping him in Skjoldheim indefinitely would strain relations with the Wolfclaw and potentially place the village at risk of retaliation. The council must know this, Eirik insisted. They can't send him back to certain death. They won't believe a child's gestures alone, Gunnar cautioned, especially when interpreted by those who have reason to keep him here. The blacksmith's assessment was frustratingly accurate. Without concrete evidence of the threat to Vali, the council, particularly Yoren, would likely prioritize Skjoldheim's interests over the boy's safety. Then we need more than gestures, Astrid said decisively. We need proof that can convince even Yoren that returning Vali would be dishonorable. How? Eirik asked. The only witness who could confirm the plot against him is Håkon, and he's dead. Astrid's expression turned calculating. Håkon's personal effects are being prepared for return to his clan. Perhaps there's something among them, a message, a token, some evidence of conspiracy. Searching a dead man's belongings? Gunnar frowned. That walks a dangerous line, Shieldmaiden. So does sending a child back to his death, she countered firmly. I'll examine Håkon's effects myself. As a council advisor, it's within my rights to verify that all is in order for their return to his clan. The plan was not without risk, but it offered a chance of finding the evidence they needed. Eirik nodded his agreement, then turned back to Vali, who had been watching their exchange with the attentive focus of a child accustomed to reading adults' moods for signs of danger. We'll protect you, Eirik promised, placing a hand over his heart, no matter what. Whether Vali understood the specific words or merely the intent behind them, he responded by reaching out to touch Eirik's chest lightly, a gesture of trust that spoke more eloquently than any shared language could have. As the day wore on, the four of them settled into a strange domestic rhythm. Gunnar working on small forge projects he had brought with him, Astrid preparing food and maintaining her weapons, Eirik teaching Vali simple words in their language while the boy continued his carving. It was an unexpected pocket of peace amid the larger tensions surrounding them, a glimpse of what might be possible under different circumstances. When evening approached, Gunnar departed for the forge, promising to return the following day. Astrid left shortly after to examine Håkon's effects, leaving Eirik alone with Vali as darkness fell over Skjoldheim. The boy seemed more relaxed than he had been since his arrival, perhaps because the day's simple activities had provided a much-needed sense of normalcy. As Eirik prepared him for sleep, Vali surprised him by speaking, the first voluntary words he had offered in their language. "Eirik," the boy said carefully, pointing to him. Then, touching his own chest, "Vali." Finally, he gestured to include them both and added a new word, "friend." The simple declaration caught Eirik off guard, a lump forming in his throat at this evidence of the bond forming between them. "Yes," he confirmed softly, "friends." Vali nodded, satisfied, then settled onto his sleeping platform, clutching his carved wolf alongside his hidden amulet. Within minutes, he had drifted into sleep, his small face peaceful in a way it rarely was while awake. Watching him, Eirik felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose. Whatever happened in the days ahead, he would not abandon this child who had placed such trust in him. Friend, protector, guardian. The exact role mattered less than the commitment it represented. As the fire burned low and night deepened around Skjoldheim, Eirik made a silent promise to the sleeping boy, that he would find a way to ensure Vali's safety, whatever the cost might be to himself.
What he could not know was how soon that promise would be tested, or how drastically circumstances were about to change for them all.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.